Good morning and welcome to our UBC Learning Circle, Healing Inner Voices with Martin Morberg. Today's conversation is presented in partnership with the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health. We'd like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle and allowing us to have these conversations. Before we formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Feel free to introduce yourselves and the nation you're calling in from in the chat box. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarain Squawkin. I'm the Learning Circle Manager. I am Seal Okanagan on my mother's side and Hickory, Apache, and Belgian on my father's side. I'll be the moderator for today's discussion, and today working behind the scenes is Cynthia, our production coordinator. She'll be in the background interacting with everyone in the chat. And finally, before we get into today's discussion, I'll provide a gentle heads up that the topics covered may be sensitive or emotionally triggering. So please look after yourself. And if at any point in time you need to talk to a friend, elder, or counselor, don't hesitate to do so. We will have some prompts in the chat if you need additional support. Now I'll turn it over to Martin to introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name is Martin Morberg. I am Northern Shoshone and Tlingit. So I'm originally from the Yukon Territory, and the lands that I belong to are in the southern lakes of the Yukon Territory, leading down the Stikine, where my ancestry comes from, the northwest part of like BC and into Alaska, where the Tlingit people come from. I am claimed by the First Nation of Notchonayagdun on my Northern Shoshone side. I am part of the Doklawady clan, which is the eagle and killer whale crest. And the Tlingit name I was given at birth is Yucca-Kwan. And so I think it's really important just to state and establish indigeneity, kind of lands-based identity clans. And so thank you for inviting me to do that today. I've been an activist in the Indigenous HIV movement for about the last 10 years, doing a lot of work in the grassroots community. And then over the last 5 years, kind of more formally in the Two-Spirit resurgence movement happening across Turtle Island. I just wanted to say I'm currently in Treaty 6 territory, the ancestral lands of the Nakota, Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Métis people, colonially known as Edmonton, Alberta. So thank you so much for coming today, and we'll see how it goes. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the creation of Healing Inner Voices, some of the inspiration and motivation, and kind of how it came to fruition. So I've been living with HIV for 12 years, and upon diagnosis, I will say that it was a very devastating time of my life. There was a very deep spiritual wound that happened during that time. And I was brought into the Western colonial healthcare system. And at that time in my life, was very defeated, did not have enough knowledge or strength or kind of personal power or liberation to adequately advocate for myself and to confront the stigma and discrimination that I was facing within the Western healthcare system. This seems to be a bit of a common theme amongst Indigenous people living with HIV/AIDS, IPHAs. And there's kind of this idea of kind of a Western worldview in their healthcare, if you want to call it that, in their medical system, to really look at the physicality of a person, completely kind of overlooking more holistic Indigenous worldviews and considering a person's mental, emotional, and for me, most importantly, spiritual health. And so was very much treated, I guess, as a number, as a body, kind of as a patient, and was given Western medication for HIV, antiretrovirals, and was told to take my pills once a day. This is what your numbers mean. We'll get you down to undetectable. And that's about as far as they took me. And at that time in my life, what I really needed um, was a more deep, meaningful, I guess, cultural experience to address what was happening for me spiritually. And so I was actually a couple years into my diagnosis. I had been on the ARVs for about a year and was really struggling in my own personal life. And I always raise my hands in a good way to our Indigenous women. That includes any woman that identifies as a woman. They have been my biggest supporters, my protectors, my nurturers, my cheerleaders, my sisters, my allies. And they found me, an Indigenous woman found me in Victoria, BC, and pulled me into the circle of the Indigenous HIV movement. And at that time had seen potential in me that I couldn't see for myself at that time. And, you know, with her Indigenous worldview, and me being so young and kind of a baby at the time in the movement, really took a lot of time and care to translate knowledge to me that was taking places at different conferences, different gatherings, different ceremonies that I was being invited to. And she really took a lot of time to tell me stories, to share her own personal lived experience, and kind of coached me and mentored me, and was a real auntie for me. She is one of our biggest matriarchs in the Indigenous HIV movement across the country. And so it was really her that started to feed my spirit and started to role model to me what HIV has done for her life, how she's embraced it, and how she has learned to journey with it in her life. And so this was kind of where the inspiration started, was I started to become really fascinated by personal narratives and this kind of reclamation. I guess you could say this like Indigenous discourse of how Indigenous people saw themselves, how they expressed themselves, and the work that they were doing in their communities. And so I was being invited to all of these conferences and gatherings and forums and different events throughout the country where I bared witness to some really powerful Indigenous women, Indigenous men, our Two Spirit, our gender variant relatives, our elders, you know, our aunties, our uncles, and these really powerful community members that were standing in front of these audiences of people, and they were reclaiming their narrative. They were liberated, and they were talking about HIV in a very loud way, in a very strengths-based way. And so it was at that time that I started to receive the nourishment and that spiritual medicine that I needed to continue to grow. And so by witnessing these mentors and these role models and these powerful Indigenous people, it really started to transform the way that I looked at myself and really started to mend that deep spiritual wound. And when I started to receive that spiritual medicine, it was then that I really started to grow and I really started to prosper as an Indigenous person living with HIV. I was then able to adhere to my medication. I became housed. I pursued a healing journey. I pursued sobriety. And this was a lot of the medicine that was coming from the grassroots community and was a direct result of these processes and this reclamation and this resurgence. I think settlers like to call it like decolonization and community engagement, and they have all these jargon words that they like to use in their funding grants and their discourse and the ways in which they kind of pathologize us. But as an Indigenous person who's experienced it myself, I will say that it was the community, that direct relationality, and that direct spiritual medicine that I received that completely transformed and pushed me into moments of self-actualization. And so, these doors began to open, and, these teachers came into my life and they taught me how to write grants, and they taught me about partnerships and about relationality and reciprocity and respect and humility and, all of these sacred teachings. And I one thing I really love about Indigenous storytelling, what I find from my own experience, is that they will never give you a dictionary definition. When there is a lesson to be learned, they will guide you through story. Um, until you can reach that edge of kind of self-discovery. When that lesson comes to you, you get to experience, and then the knowledge becomes yours. And so I really started to experience a lot of that and became really inspired. um, I started pursuing grassroots community projects. I was making a lot of noise. I was pounding on a lot of doors, and I was really quite fascinated, with these personal narratives, this kind of reclamation of indigeneity. And at the same time, I was starting to be recognized by more settler organizations, by some of the institutions, some Western healthcare, service providers. And they saw this young two-spirit person living with HIV that was really inspired, really active, really loud. And they really tokenized that. I started getting invited to all of these different tables, and they were always looking for recommendation and in inclusivity. And so I would join them at their tables, and what was really happening is that they were wanting me to adhere or to subscribe to settler colonialism, to their colonial frameworks, trying to use their, I guess, scientific knowledge or, their worldviews and structures, and get me to fit in those boxes so that they can better understand indigeneity, or at least be able to validate their attempts at inclusivity. Often, a real kind of checkbox through the process. I learned very quickly to confront settler colonialism, and was met with a lot of resistance. I will say I was not invited back to a lot of those tables um, because of my passion that I had learned and witnessed directly from the community. And it's funny because still today, I will be interviewed or invited to a webinar or a panel, and I will have a non-Indigenous person ask me, like, so how did you get into this career? And it baffles me because I think what they're looking for is some form of credential, what institution I've attended, what sort of degree I have, my work history, those kinds of things. And I can't fit that grassroots power, love, connection, community, ceremony, and everything that I witnessed and how impactful that was for me. I can't fit that into a Western way of understanding to be viewed as a credential or and so over time, learned a lot from the community and, did start attending some of the institutions. And, there's this real attempt at what people are calling decolonization. And, you know, I don't, I'm not here to offend anybody, but I will say that attending an institution and being one of the only Indigenous students in class, and they're talking about genocide and residential schools and, this a lot of narratives of decline and very damage centered kind of outlooks and discourse and, these pathologized, narratives of Indigenous people, to me is not decolonization. I think it is very appropriate for non-Indigenous people to be learning, but I think for us Indigenous people, I think it's our job to reclaim, um, to really explore and connect and learn from our communities and learn about our Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing. And so it was through this institution and my involvement kind of in the sector, we'll call it, um, that I was starting to be exposed to a lot of the colonial discourse and the ways in which we were being described and pathologized and dissected and ways of understanding who and what we are. And often these colonial approaches would go into a demographic or go into a population, and it would become about this approach of pathologizing. And so it would be, like, well, ABC is this population's problem. And we colonial settlers, institutions, academic scholars have their solution. And this is modern assimilation, really, completely bypassing Indigenous sovereignty, autonomy, knowledge, wisdom, ceremony. And I think that we have these really profound and powerful Indigenous people that are experts of their own communities. They are experts of their own distinct groups and have these powerful ways of being and doing and knowing, and often have to really fight for that kind of sovereignty, have to really go up against each other for the limited resources that are made available to Indigenous people, under a government, of like with the TRC and then the MMIWG2S and all of these calls to action, and we're still fighting for these adequate resources to return to our ways of being. And, like being exposed to this discourse is so could be so influential, this white listening or this white gaze of these powerful academics that are in these classrooms and in these lecture halls, and they're describing us, and they're saying, they're disproportionately affected. They are a vulnerable population. They are at risk. And so really positioning us in a place of almost savagery, and that we are in desperate need of Euro-Christian values and this settler knowledge in these institutions. And so, when we look at things like knowledge translation and the way that knowledge is shared, we have these hierarchies, these health authorities, these institutions, that are attempting to translate scientific knowledge to communities that they've never even set foot in. But because of their academic background, because of their power and whiteness, are fully supported and funded, to do this work in Indigenous communities. And then here we are in these kind of scarce landscapes trying to do our own work. And so, it's this discourse in the media, in the institutions, in healthcare, and justice, and education that really perpetuates stereotypes, through their damage-centered and narratives of decline. And so it was baffling to me as a person that was raised in my activism by these aunties and these elders and these liberated, powerful voices. And it was baffling for me to think, why aren't these voices here? Why aren't they being highlighted? Why aren't they being centered and supported and funded? Um, and so, it was this kind of stirring, this kind of internal disturbance, but at the same time, this kind of inspiration. It's like these stereotypes and the voyeurism, when we look at a neighborhood like the downtown East Side, for an example, you'll see sex work and violence and crime and drug use, and this is what's really being highlighted and centered, and it completely erases the humanity, the indigeneity. There is a powerful community in the downtown East Side. Some of our most powerful Indigenous matriarchs came together for that Valentine's Day march. Their systems of knowledge translation and support and care and the way that they can take care of themselves. But they're not being supported. They're not being adequately funded or given the resources that they need to do their own work. And so it's about sovereignty, it's about autonomy, it's about reclamation. And so, this was kind of the basis of healing inner voices. It was a total resistance to the damage-centered narratives of decline. And it was this reclamation of this spiritual approach of storytelling. And a beautiful two-spirit elder, Dr. Albert McLeod, I'm just saying his name to source where I learned this, but he was telling us that, like these Indigenous methodologies of knowledge translation historically were through oral histories, were through storytelling. And, they would create imagery and they would use metaphors and, euphemisms, and they would kind of take you on these journeys through this storytelling and, within their own languages. And within those languages is deeply ingrained those Indigenous worldviews. And this is how knowledge was shared with each other. This is how children were raised. And so, thinking of that and some of the stories that I was told, as a young Tlingit person, as a child, I recognize now that that was really a foundation of, of learning what they gave to me, of how I can see myself and the world around me and the ways in which I'm in relation to it. Um, and really has brought me to places of, profound self-actualization and the purpose and the journey and the earth walk. And so, through the community, through indigeneity, through a lot of stories and personal narratives, has really shaped me into who and what I am today. And so I'm not going to tell you that I have some fancy title or that I'm a career girl or that I went to this institution and these anthropologists and historians and all of these books and academia has prepared me to do the work that I'm doing today. But I will say that it has been the love of the community. It has really, the community has raised me. The community continues to raise me. And so this film is a statement of that. It is a reclamation of personal narrative. We were very resistant to any scientific data because we didn't want to use terminology of decline, of damage, of trauma. And we really wanted to give Indigenous people and, settlers working with Indigenous people a deeper insight into the realities of living with HIV. And it is not trauma porn. We are not victims of HIV. We are not trying to get people to feel sorry for us. We are not sick. We are not ill. Um, we are liberated. We are these powerful Indigenous people that have learned that HIV has been one of our greatest teachers. And so our intention was to go back to that storytelling, to offer insight, to awaken compassion, to awaken um, understanding, and to educate people about our humanity, about our indigeneity, about our healing, about these very strengths-based approaches to worldviews, to culture, to ceremony, and really humbly offer it to the Indigenous, communities as a way to translate knowledge that we're here, that we're living healthy lives, that we are powerful, and that we have a community and indigeneity that has raised us and loved us. And so, this process, we wanted to be really mindful of the land that we were doing this on. This is, Vancouver is the land of the Coast Salish, of the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and then there's surrounding nations. And they have deep history to those lands and their own worldviews and their own stories. And so we really wanted to honor that. And so Gabriel George, partnered with us, a Tsleil-Waututh man who, lost his younger brother, who is a two-spirit person, to AIDS-related illness. And it was really important for us to honor that, to honor that local experience, that local culture, and to recognize that this work wouldn't be possible on these lands without the care and love and support shown to these lands by the local nations for time immemorial. Just a quick side comment. If you're introducing yourself as an uninvited guest, get to it. Build those relations, show that care, show that support, leverage that power, provide those resources, become those allies. There is a remedy to the uninvited. I have seen some pretty powerful allies being deeply involved in Indigenous work, positioning themselves as settlers, in support of that work. Just a little side comment. So through the process, we had an elder. People like to ask me, like what frameworks, designs, whatever, all these fancy titles of the way they like to describe Indigenous work. And I just like, you can call it what you need to understand, but just don't force it on us. But I will say that the process was led by a beautiful elder, who some of you probably know, Glida Morgan, who led us through ceremony, who took us through talking circles, cedar brushings, smudging, prayer, song, just loved us and nurtured us through that process. And it was through those Indigenous practices that the vision became clear, that we started to bring it to fruition. And so each each Indigenous person in the film had sovereignty, had autonomy, independence, they had freedom, ongoing consent. They were able to reflect their stories to what was the most true and authentic for them. And so in the beginning, you will hear a bit of the initial experiences that were somewhat devastating, but only to establish the reality of HIV. And then it becomes this upward trajectory of healing and power and culture and ceremony and these liberated Indigenous people that are reclaiming their ways of doing by these personal narratives. So I think I've talked enough. Sometimes I get a little passionate about these things. But with that, we can cue the film. If there's anything I forgot to talk about the film, I will make a couple comments after, and then we can open it up for question and answer period. Just in regards to the questions, I just want to be careful about it. I just want people to think if it's a question that they would like to be asked before posing the question. So with that being said, you can push play. I hope you enjoy the film. And please understand that it is a spiritual approach as a form of knowledge translation and knowledge sharing. So masicho, ganesh, enjoy the film.
Wow, that was such a great film.
Yeah, thank you. Um, masicho, ganesh. I just want to make sure that people are aware that this was very much a collective effort, a grassroots, Indigenous-led, community-based initiative. And, without all of the people involved, and the support and even the allyship, the film would have never came to fruition. So just want to make sure that people are aware of that.
Mhm.
I just wanted to offer some closing thoughts,
Yes,
and
of course, yeah.
we can proceed with any questions or comments.
That sounds great.
Um, so, when I spoke of earlier about Indigenous oral histories and storytelling, um, I remember when I was younger, the ways in which those elders and aunties and uncles told us those stories. And it was really, it was not a textbook definition. It was a story that they used culture and Indigenous worldviews to lead the learner to a place of discovery. And so it was never about your direct circumstances, it was about a teaching in the story. And when that landed, it was profound and impactful. And then the knowledge became mine because I had experienced it. And it is very similar to what has happened in the Indigenous HIV movement from hearing those stories. And that's why I refer to those childhood stories as a foundation, because it would be later in my life that I would be exposed to those stories from Indigenous people in reclaiming their narratives that would lead me to a place of very profound self actualization. And so you hear me in the film, and I'm asking questions. I'm saying, why did that happen to me as a child? And, why do I have to be gay? And why am I living with HIV? And it was through the community and their mentorship and their stories and their spiritual medicine that I was led to a place of self actualization, of a deep understanding of this is why to do the work that you're doing today. And so those moments have happened in ceremony, in front of audiences, with our young people, with our Two Spirit people. And it's this affirmation of, and this validation of this is why, because it has prepared me to do this. And so my experience has been these opening doors. And so a door will open, and sometimes I'm scared and I need to reach out to my aunties and to my elders and to my Two Spirit relatives, and they help me walk through the door. And then I do the work that's being presented, and then another door opens. And so it's become this upward trajectory of learning and self discovery and self actualization. And so that's the best that I can articulate. How did you get into this career? And so it's a service. It's a position of service to Indigenous people. And so I'm extremely proud of, these Indigenous people in the film, because it was those stories that gave me the spiritual medicine that I needed to grow and to prosper and to find purpose and to experience full circles in my life. And nowhere in that journey did somebody pull out a anthropology book or a very skewed history perspective from a settler historian. It was very much grassroots from the community. And so I guess what I'm trying to express here is that deep need for Indigenous ways of being and doing and knowing, and that, Western worldviews and the medical system, um, are designed, without us in mind. And so this approach to physicality and, here's your pills, go away, um, kind of approaches, are not, like the ARVs are a basis for me to be alive. But in order to prosper and for the quality of my life, it was that spiritual medicine that I needed, that I received from Indigenous people. And so the knowledge here in this film is valid, is impactful, and has the power to make an impact and educate. And I'm quite fascinated by some Indigenous scholars and their theories, but Deanne Million speaks about this felt theory, about those reclamation of those personal narratives, and how when we articulate and express through our own worldviews, can have an impact on other people's emotions, and their responses and their compassion and empathy and understanding, and how that can create change in our communities. And so, it's a resistance to, I guess, colonial discourse, and a reclamation of our own ways of being and doing. And so, I guess with that being said, I just wanted to raise my hands in a good way to all of the Indigenous people that contributed, the local Coast Salish people that gifted us song, that gifted us acknowledgement and recognition to do this work out of the West Coast, and to the allies that position themselves in places of support, and use their skill sets to support an Indigenous-led initiative. And so it is possible. Um, so I guess we can move into some questions or comments, and I will answer them to the best of my ability.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say thank you, Lim Lim. I have so many notes here. I was taking them throughout the film and then just trying to recap kind of what you were sharing at the beginning. But like one thing that just kind of hit home for me is like I love that you share that our knowledge translation is important to our community wellness and our own healing journey, and that we are reclaiming our ways of knowing and doing and being, which has been probably a long process for us, which will probably still continue to be, but it's great to hear that like it's making an impact within our community, especially through your work with healing inner voices and how it's really made an impact on your life and especially uh, yeah. So I just wanted to say yeah, that really resonated with me, and it also reminded me of my favorite quote by one of my favorite authors slash like ancestor. Her name's Morning Dove, and the quote is, "Everything on this earth has a purpose. Every disease an herb to cure it, and every person a mission. This is our Indian theory of existence." That's by Morning Dove. I think her Insulation name is Hum Ishma and Christine Quintasket. So I thought that was kind of nice to hear. It resonated with me with today's conversation. And we have a few questions here. The first one is I love this film. I love the storytelling. How can we access the film to share with our network?
So, the film is not made publicly available. It is by inquiry. And sadly, we've had to learn this through the experience because there can be um, consumption
Mhm.
um, of the indigeneity. And so it's designed with an intention. And so, because of that reason, people can inquire, and then we kind of vet the process just to ensure that it's being reflected and represented in an accurate way and that it aligns with the intentions from the collective. So I've asked Cynthia to please post the website where you can access our pitch deck, some of the quotes from the film people. And then also, if you wanted to contact me directly to inquire, I've asked Cynthia to please post my work email. So you can view, I think, maybe a 5 to 6 minute trailer on the website. Um, and you can download the pitch deck. And if you wanted to provide that information to your networks as a possible way to see the film, there are other presenters that are in the film or myself that, could make ourselves available to do a bit of an introduction, a bit of a closing, and then maybe some questions, something very similar to the presentation today. And so feel free to send me an email and share the information on the website.
Great, thank you so much. And yes, definitely. I know tons of other communities are probably really interested in this, and I just love how beautiful it was made. Like, so I just want to hold my hands up to you and say, like, Lim Limt, you did such an amazing job with the film, and I'm really, really happy we got to watch it today. Our next question is, what's the biggest challenge you encountered while filming this amazing story?
So, what I've learned from some of our Two Spirit elders is that we exist, Two Spirit and gender variant people with the intersection of indigeneity often exist in between spaces and exist outside of the binary. And there are many binaries in which we navigate today. And one of those is being positioned between settler colonialism and their structures and their limitations, and then the power of an Indigenous community, and to push back to the colonialism and to create that space for Indigenous people. And so the work with the actual community was very healing, was very empowering for me, but it was trying to convince the settler funding bodies and structures of why this needed to be Indigenous led and why there needed to be autonomy and sovereignty um, in the ways in which we were going to tell these stories. And so that is the challenge that I'm sure a lot of us face as Indigenous people working in between these binaries of settler colonialism and Indigenous communities. And so that was the biggest challenge, was to convince these funding structures and bodies to fund us an adequate amount to do this. And then, as we all know, the sustainability of these kinds of projects and like introducing Indigenous principles around relationality, reciprocity, the things that we're taught that we integrate into these projects, um, and trying to take those worldviews and translate them to funding bodies that have, some pretty strict criteria and often have their own agenda of how they see valid work being done in Indigenous communities, often measurables, quantifying things, outcomes, outputs, data, these kinds of things is what they're looking for. And so to convince them about a spiritual approach through story was quite challenging,
Mhm.
and still did not receive the adequate funding to fulfill some of our intentions, but did the best that we could with what we had. Yeah.
Wow. Well, you did a great job with handling that challenge. I know sometimes it's not easy to um, get people to open up about some of those vulnerable stories, and I feel like that's where a lot of our learning is made through the knowledge translation is hearing those vulnerable stories and how we can have more empathy for one another and how to support one another and whether that be like through allies or through community. And I guess both would be allies would be within community. But yeah, so I like that you were able to persevere through those challenges.
So just a little piece on that vulnerability is that there was a lot of work put into relationality. You cannot approach an Indigenous person and ask them to share these kinds of things. You have to make a deep offering of yourself and
Hmm.
that time and that effort and those protocols and everything that it takes to establish those relationships and that reciprocity that I am not asking someone to do something that I am not willing to do myself. And so
Hmm.
very much um, gave a lot of that effort and time um, to then receive and then have this kind of exchange with the people in the film. Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that too. Also reciprocity. That's such a big one. So thank you. Our next question is, what does I am claimed mean, and what does that mean to you?
So thank you for that last part because I can only say what it means for me.
Hmm.
And I don't want to get like overly controversial. I know that this is a different experience for a lot of people. I know we have a lot of people reclaiming, a lot of people that were stolen from their communities. But when I say that, it is a way to establish indigeneity, um, because we are in the face of pretendianism. We are in an era of pretendianism. And so to say that is saying that there is a community, there are elders in that community that are in relation to my bloodline with my grandmother, my Northern Shoshone grandmother, my Tlingit grandmother, to those lands and that blood lineage and that Indigenous experience that they've had, um, that can say, we claim him, he is Nachonayak Dan, he is Doklawady, he is the grandchild of these matriarchs. And that's just for me personally, that is just my own personal kind of experience. So I think for me, it's been important for consistency that I am introducing myself the same nation, the same name, the same clan every single time, and that I am not only registered, federally through the Indian Act, but that there is a blood lineage that I am connected to, and there
Hmm.
is a community that can validate that. Yeah, and I really have a lot of respect for people that are pursuing those lineages, and I really hope that they find those connections, those lineages that are beating through their hearts that they belong to, because there are many barriers, often colonial barriers that they're having to jump through. And this pretendianism is a big interference and mockery of us and those people that are journeying home, that are trying to reconnect to their home. And so I
Mhm.
think that they need a lot of love and support in that reclamation as well, when those lineages and are there. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that's a great way of practicing our oral histories through our ancestors and lineage and
Mhm.
um, kind of maintaining our Indigenous ways of knowing and whatnot. So I like that. We have two questions here. We'll have just a few minutes left, so we'll have to keep the answers a little quick. But the question is, where can I follow your work, and are you on social media?
I am not much of a social media queen. I'm like, I got my Facebook for laughter and some connection with my friends. Um, I mean, I guess I don't often like share my title or things that I do, but I work with the Two Spirit program at the Community-Based Research Center. You can look them up at cbrc.net. I work with a team of Two Spirit people. We do a lot of like educational workshops, resource development, public health campaigning, those kinds of things. We have our medicine bundle project. We have uh, educational modules for service providers to teach them Indigenous approaches to health, how to support Indigenous people. We also do like PowerPoints and different presentations and those kinds of things. So you'll be able to find some of our contact and some of our materials online. And then I do a couple other film presentations, and so you could find me there or just email me. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. And then our last question is, how do you strengthen your spirit when you move through colonial spaces? And how might we, just a second, I have to scroll. Um, how might we sustain our spirits while we resist and reclaim?
I mean, I can really only speak for myself. I don't often offer advice or tell people what I think they should do, but I will share my own experience. Is it's a kinship.
Mhm.
Um, there is a movement. There is this strong, kind of powerful activity happening in across Turtle Island, and it's really our time to shine. And we
Mhm.
have these young two-spirit people, and these Indigenous people living with HIV, and so outside of my work, I'm very intentional about spending time in the community, about going directly up to people and elders and introducing myself and where I'm from, and offering something,
Mhm.
and building those relations. And it's become this really strong network, this kinship. I'll just quickly end with, I just came off like a 6-week road trip through the States where I went and spent time with like all of my Two Spirit relatives down there. And it's been about attending those gatherings, breaking bread, sharing stories, laughter. It's really based on that relationality piece that has opened doors for me. And so I would say for me, it's really the kinship of of the Indigenous communities and how important it is to not just attend the agenda, but to break that bread, to have that tea, to share that laughter in those in between spaces. in the structures that we navigate. And that is where a lot of the work takes place as well.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to hear about the work you've done with healing inner voices and just your journey through living with HIV and whatnot. So I'm really grateful and thank you so much for sharing your story and whatnot. Um, and yeah, I just hold my hands up to you and say limb lived. And we are so grateful to have you on the Learning Circle. So thank you to all our guests and to everyone for joining us today. And thank you so much, Martin, for the amazing discussion. It was great to learn about the program you work with, watch the film, and then also just talk about how reclaiming and reconnecting to your Indigenous culture has really shaped your journey with life and whatnot. So, yeah, thank you. And just before we end the webinar, we'd love to bring your attention to our upcoming webinars. We have them free to sign up for on our website at www.learningscircle.ubc.ca. Our next one is Cultural Safety in Healthcare. That is on May 16th. And then we have Nurses Supporting Indigenous Wellness. That is on May 23rd. And then Services for Children and Youth and with support needs, and that is in September 5th. So sign up for them on our website and or our newsletter. And thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing everyone at our next Learning Circle. Live, live. Thank you.